This is question time at Alhambra Investments. It is also election day and the end of a political cycle. And so before I bring in Joe and Steve, I have a question for you. How much has politics affected the way you think and the way you feel right now? And so, guys, I give you that question too, although focused a little bit more toward investment in the economy. Joe, what do you think?
Um, well, I'm a political junkie. I love politics. So I don't like, it's interesting. I love politics and I hate politicians. I really don't like either side. So I'm just I'm one of those lost souls who doesn't really have a home because I'm kind of in the libertarian space, not anarchist space, by the way, but more libertarian. I'm kind of a live and let live kind of guy. Leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, and that would be fine. But it is an interesting time right now politically. Obviously, it's been a very interesting time for the last, gosh, I guess really back to 2008 with that election because we've had a lot of upheaval in the economy during that time, and I think that that's had a big impact on the politics of today. And today we'll see where this goes. As I just want to see tomorrow morning when we get up that everybody's peaceful. That's what I hope for, not necessarily pulling for either side. So yeah, it's had an impact. It doesn't have any impact on our investing though. I will say that we don't really think too much about politics here, mostly because when we look back at history, believe it or not, and I know that people are going to be like, "Oh, there's no way." But here's the truth. Politics really doesn't matter all that much when it comes to the market and when it comes to the economy. The U.S. economy in particular has performed well, and the stock market has performed well under both parties. And we've looked at that as far as whether it's one party in charge or whether it's divided government. Um, Divided government is what's happened most of the time. I think that's 61% of the time back to, I think, 1900. 61% of the time has had been some form of division where you've had the House or the Senate in separate hands or the White House in separate hands, whatever. And in that iteration, you get a pretty good result. You get almost 3% growth. You get a little over 8% return on your stock market on the S&P 500. If you look at the alternatives, um, those are a little bit higher, I guess. If you look at, I think it's complete Republican control. I think it's been 10% of the time, and the rest of it is complete Democratic control. Democrats have a little bit better track record on GDP growth when they're in control, and the Republicans have a little bit better track record on the stock market. So there you go. Everybody should be satisfied with those things, no matter how this thing comes out. We will know what to do.
Well, Steve, I'm curious. You're in California. You're on the West Coast. Is there any difference there than what Joe just described?
Kind of in one way, surprisingly not. It's an adversarial system. So my choice for House seat is a Democrat or another Democrat. And it's still an adversarial system. They're still running commercials against each other. It's still kind of has that kind of like stress level to it. So even where I'm sitting here with a D versus D battle, it's still politics. It's still awfully the same. And it's also it's made for campaigning and storytelling. So one of the guys, while I was working, doing work on the pension fund, actually worked with him a bit and got to know him a bit. And the TV appearances do not really reflect, for better or for worse, who the real person is. So it just all seems to be kind of the same thing, no matter where you are.
Well,
So,
I wouldn't say exactly the same thing. Sorry about that, Bob. Let me just put this in. I did vote last weekend. I voted early because I didn't want to deal with, well, there won't be any lines here. In fact, I went by my regular polling place this morning and there were some cars in the parking lot, but there was no line because this is about, I live in South Carolina. It is about as deep red as you can find. And when we did our ballot, there were some choices at the top of the ticket, but the further down you went, it was R versus nobody. So we didn't even have a choice. It was Republican all the way down the line. I would say roughly 70% of my choices were Republican or nobody. And so that's what you get in a state like this. But anyway, um, Bob, we're going to talk about this, about politics and the market. Is that what we're going to talk about?
yeah, and I was curious because a lot of people take politics in different ways. So how much do you see that politics is driving consumer sentiment, emotions, even actions?
Well, look, we don't have to guess at that. We know how it's done, right? I would say that if we watch the University of Michigan consumer sentiment poll, that one's the one that everybody's looking at. The division has grown over the last decade and a half, but it's always been there. There's always been some partisan divide with consumer sentiment. If you go back to 1985, just as an example, 1985, that's the beginning of the second Reagan term, so it's obviously a Republican period. Back then, I just pull up a number here. January of 1985, the consumer sentiment number for Republicans was 107.1, and it was 85.2 for Democrats and 99.7 for independents. So there's obviously a partisan divide there where Democrats at that time did not see the economy as good as the Republicans did. So there's always been a divide, but it has gotten worse. If you jump ahead to 2000 and let's say, well, you jump ahead to now. The most recent survey has Democrats consumer sentiment is 91.4 and Republicans is 53.6. It's not even close. And by the way, University of Michigan breaks this down into Democrat, Independent, and Republican. And the independents, just in this case, seem to be leaning more towards what the Republicans see. Independents, their consumer sentiment right now is 65.8. I don't know if that necessarily means anything all that much, but it maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We'll see. Maybe tomorrow we'll see how much that means. But I will say that what's happened here, the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Poll used to be very useful, and now it's become basically useless. It doesn't tell you what's going on with the economy because people are seeing everything through this political lens, which is unfortunate, I think. It would be nice to have a more balanced view of things, if people could separate their politics from their view of the economy, but apparently they can't. We see it in other things too, not as much, but we see it, for instance, in a National Federation of Independent Businesses, NFIB. Their small business survey tends to be very skewed towards Republicans, and it makes sense. A lot of small business owners are Republicans. We also see it in some of the ISM surveys, where we see and actually the ISM surveys, the most common comment I've seen recently is we're waiting for the election results. And that, I think, is probably the most important thing to take away from election and from politics and investing. Politics like this creates uncertainty. It's the uncertainty that's the problem. The market can handle Republicans in charge. It can handle Democrats in charge. What it can't deal with is not knowing who's in charge. So the uncertainty, usually after the election, the market tends to rally into the end of the year. Why? Well, because the uncertainty is relieved. Now you have certainty and you're able to go ahead and make policy about what you're going to do with your company and how you're going to invest, for instance. So generally, that's the thing that's the real big deal about politics. It's not so much who wins or loses. It's that the uncertainty is relieved. And so hopefully we get it relieved this week and we know who's going to be president and who's going to control Congress and so forth. At least I hope so.
So the election is today. The presidential political season is over. Take a breath. We don't have to put up with this for another 2 years.